It's not an aircraft. The words drift through the radio, trembling with fear, and then silence. That was the last anyone ever heard from Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old pilot who vanished into the night sky over Bass Strait, Australia, in 1978. Welcome, explorers of the unknown. This is at Mystery Vault 80, your destination for stories that challenge what we think we know. If you love unsolved mysteries, eerie encounters, and true events that defy explanation, you're in the right place. So before we begin, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. We upload new stories every day/week, and every story takes you one step deeper into the unknown. The narrative unfolds slowly, cinematic tone. Frederick's flight was supposed to be routine, a short trip from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne to King Island. But what happened during that 47-minute journey has become one of the most perplexing aviation mysteries in history. Radar showed his small Cessna moving steadily south, then suddenly disappearing from the map. Radio contact broke mid-sentence, and the final thing heard over the airwaves wasn't turbulence or mechanical failure. It was the metallic scraping sound of something unexplainable. Witnesses on the ground later reported seeing strange green lights over the coastline that same night. Some swore they saw an aircraft being followed by a glowing object. Others say the sea itself glowed beneath the flight path, like a portal opening beneath the waves. Could have been a secret government experiment, a freak natural phenomenon, or something that didn't belong to this earth at all. As we explore this story tonight, remember, every mystery has layers, and your thoughts matter. Drop your theory in the comments below. Do you believe Frederick Valentich was taken, lost, or silenced? Make sure you're subscribed to at Mystery Vault 80 and turn on notifications because we bring you new mysteries from around the world every single week. Your support helps keep this vault of mysteries open and growing. Now, let's open the vault together and revisit the skies above southern Australia, where one young pilot vanished into thin air and left behind a question that no one has ever answered. It was a clear October evening in 1978 when 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentich climbed into his single-engine Cessna 182L and prepared for what should have been a simple, peaceful flight. His route was familiar, a short trip from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne to King Island, Tasmania, a journey of just over 200 miles across the Bass Strait. Frederick was an aviation enthusiast, young and ambitious. He dreamed of one day becoming a commercial pilot. Friends and instructors described him as polite, serious, and deeply passionate about flying. But on that night, as the sun began to set over the Australian coastline, Frederick Valentich was about to enter aviation history. Not for his achievements, but for his mysterious disappearance that still defies explanation nearly half a century later. The flight was planned carefully. Frederick filed a flight plan, refueled, and checked the weather: clear skies, light winds, and good visibility. It was a calm, perfect evening for flying. At 6:19 p.m., he took off in his Cessna 182L, registration VHDSJ, and began climbing to his cruising altitude of 5,000 feet. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But about 40 minutes later, over the dark, cold waters of the Bass Strait, something strange happened. Something that would transform an ordinary flight into one of the most puzzling disappearances in Australian aviation history. At approximately 7:06 p.m., Frederick radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice was calm, but curious. He asked if there were any known aircraft flying near him. The controller replied, "No known traffic in your area." Frederick hesitated, then spoke again. "It's a long shape, metallic. It's got a green light, and it's moving at high speed." The air traffic controller tried to make sense of what he was hearing. Was it another plane? A reflection? Frederick continued, "It's coming for me right now. It seems to be playing some sort of game." Over the next 6 minutes, Frederick Valentich described the object circling him, approaching, then vanishing. He reported that his engine was running rough, that the mysterious craft was hovering above him, and that its metallic surface was shining in the setting sun. Then his last transmission came through. "It's not an aircraft." What followed was 17 seconds of metallic scraping sounds, static distortion, and then silence. No further communication. No distress signal. No radar return. Frederick Valentich and his aircraft had disappeared completely. The authorities immediately launched an extensive search. Rescue teams scoured both the Bass Strait and surrounding coastlines. For days, aircraft and naval vessels covered hundreds of square miles. They found no wreckage, no oil slick, and no trace of Frederick or his plane. It was as though the Cessna had simply vanished in a thin air. The only thing left behind was the recording of that eerie radio conversation, the chilling words of a pilot describing something unexplainable in the skies above Australia. In the days that followed, investigators, skeptics, and believers all asked the same question. What did Frederick Valentich see that night? Was it a military aircraft? A hoax? Or was it something not of this world? As we move deeper into the story, we'll explore the clues, the theories, and the man behind the mystery. Because before understanding what happened in the sky, we need to understand who Frederick really was. If you're intrigued by what you've heard so far, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this documentary. We upload deep dive investigations and mysteries daily. And in the next chapter, we'll uncover the life of Frederick Valentich, the pilot whose final words still haunt aviation history. To understand the disappearance of Frederick Valentich, we have to understand the man himself, a dreamer, a believer, and a young pilot whose fascination with the skies may have led him straight into the unknown. Frederick was born on June 9, 1958, in Melbourne, Australia. He grew up in a close Italian-Australian family, quiet, respectful, and deeply curious. From an early age, Frederick was captivated by flight. He would spend hours watching airplanes take off from Essendon Airport, his eyes tracing the contrails as they disappeared into the blue. To his parents and teachers, he seemed destined for the cockpit. But behind that ambition was something else, a fascination with the unexplained. Frederick wasn't just interested in flying. He was obsessed with UFOs. He devoured books, watched documentaries, and read every report he could find about mysterious lights and objects in the sky. Friends later recalled how he would often bring up the topic in casual conversation, speaking with both excitement and conviction. To him, the idea that we were not alone wasn't fantasy. It was fact waiting to be proven. His father, Guido Valentich, once told reporters that Frederick had a deep belief in extraterrestrial life. He even suggested that if something happened to his son, it might not have been an accident. At 20, Frederick was training to become a commercial pilot. He had logged around 150 flight hours, and though still relatively inexperienced, he was known to be careful and serious in his flying. However, not everyone agreed. According to official records, Frederick had failed several subjects in his training and had been involved in 2 minor flying incidents, one for straying into restricted airspace, another for flying into a cloud without permission. To some investigators, this painted a picture of an enthusiastic but impulsive young man. To others, it showed a passionate pilot pushing himself to prove he was capable of more. On the day of his disappearance, October 21st, 1978, Frederick told his family he was flying to King Island to pick up friends and seafood. But oddly, those friends later said they weren't expecting him, and the airport at King Island reported no arrangements for his arrival. That small inconsistency has puzzled investigators for decades. Was Frederick truly going there for a simple trip, or was he following a different purpose altogether? Some believe he was planning a private UFO watching flight, hoping to witness the unexplained lights that others had reported over the Bass Strait in the weeks prior. If that's true, it could mean his last flight wasn't a coincidence at all, but a deliberate search for something beyond the ordinary. Those who knew him described Frederick as kind and responsible, but also deeply idealistic, a young man who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. He wasn't reckless. He was hopeful. And that hope, mixed with his growing obsession with UFO phenomena, may have placed him in the wrong sky at the wrong time. In the aftermath of his disappearance, skeptics would call him naive, even delusional. Believers would call him a visionary, a man who paid the ultimate price for seeking the truth. But before we explore theories of UFOs or cover-ups, We must first retrace his final moments in the cockpit, the last radio calls, the shifting lights, and the eerie silence that followed. Because the truth of what happened on that October night might lie not in who Frederick was, but in what he encountered. If you're captivated by this mystery so far, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. Comment your thoughts below. Was Frederick Valentich chasing a dream or running into something far more dangerous? Stay tuned for the next part as we dive into the last recorded moments of his flight and the chilling 7-minute conversation that shocked investigators. Next is the last transmission. It's the turning point of the entire documentary, capturing the real-time encounter that transformed a routine flight into one of aviation's most baffling mysteries. Length: October 21st, 1978. It's just after 6 p.m. in Melbourne, Australia. 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentich departs from Moorabbin Airport in his single-engine Cessna 182L, tail number VHDSJ. His flight plan: a short trip across Bass Strait to King Island, about 125 miles away. Estimated flight time, 1 hour. Weather: clear skies, light winds. Visibility: excellent. By all accounts, it should have been a peaceful evening flight. But at 7:06 p.m., everything changes. Frederick radios Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice sounds calm, professional. He asks a simple question. "Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000? The controller checks the radar. There's nothing. No aircraft, no blips. The reply comes. Delta Sierra Juliet, no known traffic. Frederick pauses, then responds. Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000. A moment later, confusion sets in. He describes it, a long object, metallic and shiny. It's moving at an incredible speed, passing about 1,000 feet above him. Then it vanishes. At 7:09 p.m., Frederick radios again. His voice is tighter now. It's not an aircraft. It's flying over me again. The air traffic controller listens, unable to locate any radar contact. Frederick's breathing quickens. He reports that the object is orbiting above him, that it's playing some sort of game, darting back and forth. He says it's green, metallic, and shining. Then, after another pause, his voice trembles slightly as he adds, "It's not an aircraft." The transmission lasts nearly 7 minutes in total. During that time, Frederick describes what sounds like a craft circling him, moving faster and with more agility than any plane he's ever seen. At one point, he reports his engine is rough idling. He says, "My engine is rough idling. I'm going to try and see what it is." Then silence. Seconds later, his final words are broadcast across the airwaves. It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft. Then, 17 seconds of metallic scraping sounds, followed by static. After that, there's nothing. Frederick Valentich and his Cessna are gone. Controllers tried repeatedly to contact him. No response. Radar failed to show any sign of his plane. Rescue teams were immediately dispatched across the Bass Strait. They searched by air and sea for days. But no wreckage was found. No oil slicks, no debris, no trace of the pilot or the aircraft. It was as if both had been lifted off the face of the earth. What makes this moment so chilling isn't just the disappearance. It's the recorded evidence. The official transcript of Valentich's final transmission remains one of the strangest in aviation history. Experts who listened to the tape described his voice as distressed but controlled, the tone of a man genuinely witnessing something extraordinary. Some skeptics suggest he became disoriented, mistaking reflections or celestial lights for a UFO. Others believe he staged his own disappearance. But the recording, with its eerie metallic sounds, keeps pulling the case back into the realm of the unknown. In the years that followed, many would analyze every word of that final call, debating what Frederick saw, what he meant, and where he went. But one fact remains certain. In those 7 minutes, he described an encounter unlike anything ever officially reported in Australian aviation. Whether it was a tragic accident, a calculated hoax, or an otherworldly event, the last thing Frederick Valentich said still echoes like a question we've never truly answered. It's hovering, And it's not an aircraft. What do you think Frederick saw that night over the Bass Strait? Was it human error or something beyond our understanding? Share your theory in the comments. And if this mystery has your attention, hit subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. Because in the next chapter, we dive into the massive investigation that followed, and why even the Australian government couldn't explain what happened. The night of October 21st, 1978, did not end quietly in Melbourne. Within minutes of losing contact with Frederick Valentich, air traffic control declared an alert phase. No distress call had been made, but his final words, that chilling sentence, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft," sent a shiver through every controller in the room. By 7:30 p.m., a full search and rescue operation was underway across the Bass Strait, one of the most unpredictable stretches of water in the Southern Hemisphere. Aircraft from both Victoria and Tasmania combed the strait through the night. Boats scoured the choppy waters under the cold Australian sky. But by dawn, not a single trace of Frederick or his Cessna was found. Search teams continued for 4 days straight, covering more than 1,000 square miles. They found no debris, no oil slick, and no distress signals. The sea, as if keeping a secret, returned nothing. Investigators at the Department of Transport faced a puzzle with missing pieces. Frederick had been a licensed pilot with around 150 hours of flying experience. Young, yes, but not careless. He completed several solo flights and was considered competent by his instructors. So how could a routine flight vanish so completely? Authorities immediately began to construct possible explanations. 1. Pilot error. Perhaps Frederick became disoriented at dusk. Over the Bass Strait, the horizon often blends sea and sky into a single sheet of darkness. He might have entered a graveyard spiral, a deadly phenomenon where a pilot, believing they're flying level, is actually descending in a slow, unnoticed spin. But if that were true, wreckage should have surfaced within hours. It never did. 2. Engine failure. A mechanical malfunction could have forced him down. But again, no oil, no floating debris, no emergency radio beacon. 3. Stage disappearance. A more dramatic idea, that Valentich faked his own death. Some theorists point to his fascination with UFOs and science fiction, suggesting he might have used the flight to vanish deliberately. But those close to him reject that notion completely. His family described him as responsible, hopeful, and deeply attached to his loved ones. And then came the fourth theory, the one that still divides investigators today. 4. The UFO encounter. In the hours and days following Frederick's disappearance, dozens of eyewitnesses across southern Australia reported strange lights in the sky. Some claimed they saw a green glowing craft moving erratically over the coastline at the exact time Frederick vanished. One farmer reported seeing an aircraft with a bright green light hovering above it, moments before both disappeared into the darkness. The details matched Frederick's radio description almost perfectly. Even more unsettling, the Australian UFO Research Network logged multiple independent reports from civilians that night, describing fast-moving aerial lights over the Bass Strait. When officials released the radio transcript publicly, it ignited a storm of speculation. Media outlets around the world, from the Sydney Morning Herald to the New York Times, published stories with headlines like "Pilot Vanishes After UFO Sighting." For weeks, the case dominated front pages and radio talk shows. The Department of Transport's final report offered no concrete explanation. It simply concluded that the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined. That single sentence ensured the Valentich case would never fade into obscurity. What happened over the Bass Strait that night? Was Frederick Valentich a victim of a tragic accident? Or did he encounter something our science still can't explain? Decades later, with new evidence and eyewitness accounts, we'll see how the lines between reality, fear, and the unknown began to blur. Because the deeper investigators dug, the stranger this case became. What's your take? Was this human error or contact with something beyond Earth? Share your theory below in the comments. And if you're just joining us, hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. We drop new mysteries and true crime documentaries every day. In the next chapter, we dive deeper into eyewitness reports, media frenzy, and the chilling theories that still haunt the Valentich case. The Disappearance of Frederick Valentich, Australia. This chapter runs about 7 to 8 minutes, ideal for your voiceover documentary pacing. It captures the chaos, speculation, and emotion that followed the mysterious vanishing, a turning point where fact and rumor began to blur. Eyewitness accounts and public reaction. In the days following October 21st, 1978, Australia was captivated and terrified. A young pilot had vanished midair after describing something hovering above him, something not an aircraft. No wreckage, no signal, no answers. It was as though the sky itself had swallowed Frederick Valentich whole. As news of the disappearance spread, eyewitnesses began coming forward, and their stories were eerily similar. Across southern Victoria and Tasmania, residents described seeing strange moving lights over the Bass Strait that same evening. One truck driver near Cape Otway swore he saw a green light darting across the horizon, moving too fast and too silent to be a normal aircraft. A fisherman out on the water said he witnessed a circular glow hovering in place for several seconds before shooting upward into the clouds and vanishing. At least 20 independent reports matched Frederick's own description of a green metallic object, moving in ways that defied explanation. For many Australians, the case had crossed a line. This was no longer just a missing pilot. It was a national mystery. Frederick's family was devastated. His father, Guido Valentich, refused to believe his son had simply crashed. In an interview, he said, "If something happened, someone would have found him. I believe he was taken, maybe by something not from this earth." His mother echoed that belief, saying Frederick often spoke about UFOs and even expressed fear that they might come for him one day. To skeptics, that comment became ammunition, a sign that Frederick had let his fascination with the unexplained cloud his judgment. To believers, it sounded like a prophecy come true. The Australian media jumped on the story. Headlines blazed across the country. Pilot's final words, "It's not an aircraft." UFO takes plane? Bass Strait mystery deepens. Search yields nothing. Was he abducted? Talk radio and television filled with debate. Some argued for pilot error, some for military experiments, others for alien involvement. The story reached international outlets. The BBC, the New York Times, and NBC News all covered it. The Valentich disappearance became one of the most publicized aviation mysteries in Australian history. Behind the scenes, the Royal Australian Air Force and Department of Transport conducted separate investigations. Privately, officials were baffled. They couldn't prove a UFO encounter, but they also couldn't find a single shred of physical evidence to prove a crash. No fuel slick, no floating debris, nothing. One senior investigator admitted off-record that it's as if the aircraft just ceased to exist. Then came an even stranger twist. In the months after the disappearance, farmers near Adelaide reported unidentified metal fragments scattered across their fields. Some believed they were from a Cessna, but analysis by authorities showed they didn't match Frederick's plane model. Others claimed to have photographs of strange objects in the sky on the same night, though many were later dismissed as lens flares or hoaxes. Still, the coincidences kept piling up. To believers, the evidence, or the lack of it, pointed toward one conclusion. Something extraordinary had happened, something beyond human understanding. By the end of 1978, the Valentich case had grown from a single missing pilot into a global phenomenon. It divided experts, inspired documentaries, and cemented its place in UFO history. But beneath all the speculation lay a heartbreaking truth, a family without closure, and a mystery that refused to fade. In the next chapter, we'll explore the investigations that followed, the contradictions in the reports, and new theories that emerged from government cover-ups to extraterrestrial involvement. What do you think really happened to Frederick Valentich that night? Was it a tragic accident, or something far more mysterious? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget, hit like, subscribe, and share to help others discover this story. Join us tomorrow as we uncover the next chilling part of the mystery, the investigation and the conflicting evidence. As the initial shock of Frederick Valentich's disappearance began to fade, investigators faced a grim reality. There were no answers, and the public wanted them now. By early November 1978, both the Department of Transport and the Royal Australian Air Force, RAF, launched parallel investigations. They hoped to find some logical, earthly explanation for how a young pilot and his Cessna 182 could vanish so completely over the Bass Strait. But almost immediately, their findings began to contradict one another. The DOT's initial report stated that there was no evidence of engine malfunction, nor any sign of pilot distress until the final 90 seconds of radio transmission. They examined Frederick's logbook, flight plan, and maintenance records, all routine. Weather data showed clear skies and moderate visibility that evening. There was no storm, no lightning, no sudden turbulence reported by other pilots. Every logical factor checked out, which meant whatever happened, it wasn't ordinary. Investigators turned to the audio recording of Frederick's final conversation with air traffic control, the most haunting piece of evidence in the case. Experts noticed something strange. In the background of the transmission, there was a metallic scraping noise, described by some as a rhythmic, pulsing sound unlike any aircraft engine. Audio engineers ran tests but couldn't identify the source. Some said it was radio interference. Others insisted it sounded like rotating blades or a mechanical hum, possibly from another craft near Valentich's plane. One technician even claimed it resembled a metallic vibration consistent with two objects in close proximity. It was as if something was hovering right beside him. The official narrative leaned toward pilot error. Frederick, they said, may have become disoriented at dusk, misjudged his altitude, and crashed into the ocean. He could have been flying upside down without realizing it, a fatal illusion caused by spatial disorientation common among young pilots. But skeptics quickly pointed out the flaws. If he crashed, why was no wreckage ever found, despite a massive search covering hundreds of miles? And how could his calm, detailed conversation about a large metallic object be dismissed as simple confusion? Even the investigators couldn't explain his final words. It's not an aircraft. The RAF's confidential notes, later released under the Freedom of Information Act, revealed that the military did investigate UFO involvement. Though they never made that public at the time, internal memos showed concern about multiple civilian reports of unidentified aerial lights near the Bass Strait that same evening. One document even mentioned that Valentich's description of green light and hovering craft is consistent with several other radar anomalies observed that night. Yet officially, the Air Force concluded, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich cannot be explained. For Frederick's family, the investigation brought only more pain. They were shown no wreckage, no black box, no body. Every new theory, from alien abduction to suicide, felt like an insult to their son's memory. His father, Guido, kept pressing the authorities for updates. He wrote letters, demanded transparency, even reached out to international UFO researchers. He told reporters, if the government knows what happened, they're keeping it from us. His grief turned into quiet defiance, and his determination kept the story alive for decades. Over time, eyewitness contradictions made the case even murkier. Some swore they saw a glowing object chasing a small plane. Others claimed the light was just a reflection or an illusion caused by the evening sky. Each new statement blurred the line between evidence and folklore. Was this a tragic accident or a cover-up for something the public wasn't meant to know? By early 1979, official interest had faded. But in the public imagination, the Valentich case was only growing stronger. The deeper experts looked, the more questions emerged. Who or what was in the sky that night? Why did Frederick describe a shiny green metallic object? And what was that strange audio distortion on his final call? In the next chapter, we'll dive into the unofficial investigations that followed. From civilian UFO researchers, eyewitness reconstructions, and hidden files that suggest there might be more truth to Valentich's story than anyone dared admit. What's your theory so far? Cover up, accident, or contact? Tell us what you believe in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to help more viewers discover this story. Join us always for more. The civilian investigators and the UFO files. When the official investigation ended, the Valentich case should have faded into silence. But it didn't. Instead, a new kind of investigation began, one driven not by governments or military offices, but by citizens, researchers, and journalists who refused to let the mystery die. They weren't looking for bureaucratic answers. They were looking for the truth. In early 1979, members of the Victorian UFO Research Society, VUFers, one of Australia's oldest civilian investigation groups, launched a private inquiry into the disappearance. They gathered eyewitness statements, radar reports, and audio analyses from across the country. Their findings painted a far stranger picture than any official file. According to their report, multiple independent witnesses along the southern coast of Australia described seeing strange, fast-moving lights at the same time Valentich's aircraft went missing. One woman near Cape Otway said she saw a glowing, cigar-shaped object moving erratically above the sea. Another, a farmer in Apollo Bay, claimed a large light hovered low to the ground, illuminating the trees before disappearing into the clouds. These accounts were documented, timed, and cross-referenced. Each one lined up almost exactly with Frederick's last known position. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence came from a local photographer named Roy Manifold. On the same night Valentich disappeared, he had set up his camera along the southern shoreline to capture the sunset over the Bass Strait. When he developed his film, one photo stood out, a strange, dark, disc-shaped object hovering over the water. Analysts examined the photo and couldn't agree. Some said it was a developing flaw. Others insisted it was a solid object. The timing matched almost exactly with Valentich's last radio transmission. Was it coincidence, or the very object Frederick saw before he vanished? Meanwhile, UFO researchers from around the world began contacting Australian officials, asking for access to government records. The Department of Transport and RAF were hesitant. Many documents were marked classified. It wasn't until years later, under the Freedom of Information Act, that several of those files were released. Inside them were notes, witness statements, and radar anomalies that had never been shared with the public. One entry, dated October 21st, 1978, described unidentified radar returns moving at high speed over the Bass Strait. Another noted that a civilian report of green light and hovering craft was received at approximately 1900 hours, consistent with Valentich's final transmission. The data wasn't conclusive, but it raised serious questions. To the Valentich family, these revelations were both comforting and devastating. Comforting because they suggested Frederick wasn't simply lost or careless. Devastating because they confirmed something extraordinary might have happened, and no one could tell them what. Frederick's father, Guido, continued pushing for answers. He wrote to politicians, aviation authorities, and UFO groups, asking, "Why are these reports hidden? What are they afraid of?" His persistence made him a quiet legend in the UFO community, a grieving father standing up to silence. As months turned into years, the Valentich disappearance became a global case study in modern mysteries. It was discussed at UFO symposiums, featured in documentaries, and cited in aviation safety briefings. In the United States, UFO researcher Dr. Richard Haynes, a former NASA scientist, studied the case extensively. His conclusion: while there is no definitive proof of extraterrestrial involvement, the evidence strongly suggests the presence of an unknown airborne phenomenon. That statement reignited the debate, not just about what happened to Frederick, but about how much we really know about what flies above us. Decades later, the Valentich case remains one of the most well-documented UFO-related disappearances in aviation history. No trace of the aircraft, no confirmed wreckage, and no sign of the pilot were ever found. It stands as a haunting reminder. Sometimes, even in the age of radar and satellites, a person can vanish without a trace, leaving only questions that defy explanation. Do you think the government knows more than they revealed? Was Frederick Valentich a victim of the unknown, or a tragic victim of human error? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, hit subscribe, like, and share if you want more stories like this. Next, in Chapter 8, we'll explore how this case shaped Australia's aviation laws, inspired pop culture, and remains one of the most chilling disappearances of all time. Legacy, influence, and enduring mystery. The sun has long set on October 21st, 1978. The sea is calm again, but the questions that began that night still ripple through time. What really happened to Frederick Valentich? Was he lost to the elements, caught in an illusion of light and fear? Or was he taken by something beyond our understanding? Decades later, the disappearance remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in aviation history, and one that continues to divide believers and skeptics alike. In the years following the incident, Australia's aviation authorities reviewed their search and rescue protocols. The Valentich case exposed gaps in coastal tracking, radio coverage, and emergency response. By the mid-1980s, new radar systems and flight training standards were introduced to prevent future mysteries of this kind. Even though officials maintained that the cause of disappearance cannot be determined, the case left a permanent mark on how pilots are trained to report unidentified aerial phenomena, now known as UAPs. For the Valentich family, the pain never faded. His father, Guido Valentich, spent the rest of his life searching for answers, writing to journalists, UFO groups, and government agencies worldwide. He firmly believed his son encountered something real that night. In interviews, Guido often said, "Frederick wasn't reckless. He was calm, respectful, and serious about flying. If he said he saw something, I believe him." His mother, Alma, rarely spoke publicly, but friends said she would look at the ocean from time to time and whisper, "One day we'll know." It's that mixture of grief and faith that turned the Valentich disappearance into more than a mystery. It became a story about a family's unwavering hope. The Valentich case didn't stay confined to Australia. It became a global phenomenon, inspiring books, films, and documentaries. Even today, it's discussed alongside legendary disappearances like Amelia Earhart, Flight 19, and MH370. In pop culture, the story appeared in episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, Ancient Aliens, and numerous podcasts. UFO enthusiasts call it the case that changed everything, because for the first time, an official flight recording captured a pilot describing a possible UFO encounter in real time. The haunting audio, it's not an aircraft, still echoes in documentaries and archives around the world, reminding us that this wasn't fiction. It was real. It happened, and it was never explained. In 2013, a new twist surfaced. Researchers using digital sonar claimed to have found a small aircraft wreck in the Bass Strait, roughly consistent with Valentich's flight path. But when the site was examined more closely, the wreck turned out to be an older aircraft from World War II. Once again, no answers, just another dead end in an ocean full of secrets. The Valentich disappearance stands at the intersection of fact and belief, science and the unknown. Skeptics argue it was a tragic case of disorientation, a pilot flying into his own reflection, a victim of optical illusion and inexperience. But believers see something else, a young man who may have encountered something extraordinary in the skies above Australia. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe Frederick Valentich's story is not about UFOs or hoaxes, but about the human desire to seek answers in the dark, even when none are found. As the years pass, the mystery deepens. The ocean keeps its secrets, and every time a small plane crosses the Bass Strait, pilots still remember the name Frederick Valentich, a symbol of curiosity and of the thin line between our world and whatever lies beyond it. As the story of Frederick Valentich's disappearance spread, so too did the theories. Some claimed the young pilot had become a victim of forces beyond this world. Others were determined to ground the mystery firmly in logic. Cut to slow aerial shots of Bass Strait at dawn, gray clouds drifting over the sea. Aviation experts and investigators approached the case with a clear goal: to separate emotion from evidence. The Department of Transport's report made it clear. There was no proof of extraterrestrial activity, no signs of foul play, and no trace of the Cessna 182L that Valentich piloted that night. They believed the most likely answer was far more ordinary, yet equally tragic. In aviation, one investigator noted, mystery often hides in human error. Scene 2, the graveyard spiral. One leading explanation was spatial disorientation, a deadly condition that affects pilots flying over water or in poor visibility. At night, with few visual cues, the human brain can't always distinguish up from down. A pilot may believe the aircraft is level when in fact it's banking, slowly entering a downward spiral. In such a situation, the pilot's instruments may give confusing readings and panic sets in. It's possible Frederick believed the light above him was another craft, when in fact, it could have been a reflection of his own aircraft's lights on the water surface. Scene 3. The Venus illusion. Another explanation, the Venus hypothesis. At that time, the planet Venus was visible and bright in the southern sky. Pilots unfamiliar with night flying sometimes mistake it for a moving object. As Valentich described a shiny metal craft with green lights, skeptics suggest he may have been chasing a celestial body or a star, believing it to be something extraordinary. To him, it appeared to move erratically, but in truth, it was his own flight path changing as he flew. Scene 4. The aircraft's condition. The Cessna 182L was small, light, and vulnerable to coastal winds. Experts proposed a mechanical issue or fuel imbalance could have caused engine sputtering, something Valentich might have misinterpreted as an external force or scraping sound before the transmission cut out. When that happened, the aircraft may have plunged into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves in minutes. In such deep waters, the plane could easily have sunk without leaving any surface trace. Scene 5. The human element. Skeptics also examined Frederick's mindset. Reports suggested he was fascinated by UFOs, even owning several books on alien encounters. Friends recalled him discussing what it might feel like to be taken by a UFO. To investigators, this hinted at confirmation bias. When you expect to see something, your brain interprets uncertain data in that direction. Still, others defend Valentich, saying he was responsible, calm, and proud of his flying skills. No evidence supports any intent to fake or stage a disappearance. He was simply a young man following a dream. Scene 6. Unanswered questions. But despite the rational theories, none were ever proven. No wreckage, no body, no evidence of disorientation, mechanical failure, or weather issues strong enough to bring the plane down. So even the skeptics had to admit, there's a missing piece, something they couldn't explain. The simplest answer is not always the right one, a veteran investigator once said. Sometimes we just don't know. Outro segment. Transition to Chapter 10. As the years passed, both believers and skeptics held their ground. But while scientists searched for logic, Frederick's family searched for something more personal. Hope. Fade out with the narrator saying, for those who loved him, no theory was enough. Because for them, it wasn't about aliens or illusions. It was about a son who never came home. We turn to the heartbreak behind the headlines. Frederick's father's belief in his son's return and the human side of one of Australia's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The family's endless search. When the official reports ended and the headlines moved on, one thing remained. The silence of a family waiting for answers. Scene 1. A Father's Hope. In the small suburb of Moorabbin, south of Melbourne, Guido Valentich, Frederick's father, refused to believe his son had died. He often told reporters, Frederick was a good pilot. He wasn't reckless. Something or someone took him. Each morning, Guido would visit the airfield where Frederick last trained. He'd stand quietly by the hangars, watching small planes rise into the sky, hoping that maybe, just maybe, his son's Cessna would appear on the horizon. Neighbors recalled him keeping Frederick's room exactly as it was. Flight manuals, logbooks, and a small model aircraft still on a shelf. To Guido, his son wasn't gone. He was missing, and missing meant there was still hope. Scene 2. the family versus the authorities. As months passed, the Valentich family grew frustrated with the government's silence. The Department of Transport had filed the disappearance as cause unknown, closing the investigation with no physical evidence. Guido publicly criticized the decision, claiming officials were ignoring witness reports, people across southern Australia who had seen unidentified lights that same night. He said in one interview, "Too many people saw the same thing. You cannot all be mistaken." To him, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cover-up. Scene 3. The letters and the leads. Over the years, the family received letters from around the world. Some from people claiming to have seen Frederick alive. Others from UFO researchers insisting he had been abducted. One woman from Queensland swore she'd seen a small plane land in a remote field that night. Another from Tasmania said she'd seen a green glow over the Bass Strait, the same Hugh Frederick described before disappearing. Guido followed every lead. Each one ended the same way, nothing. But the family's persistence made sure the story never truly died. Scene 4. The emotional toll. Hope, over time, can become its own kind of grief. Guido's wife, Florence, rarely spoke publicly, but close friends said the disappearance haunted her every day. Each holiday, she would set an extra plate at the dinner table, one for Frederick. For them, there was no closure, no body to bury, no certainty. Only questions and a fading radio signal from 1978 that echoed endlessly in their minds. It's not an aircraft. Static. Silence. Scene 5. The father's belief. Until his death, Guido Valentich maintained that his son had been taken by an unidentified flying object. He often said, "I know my boy. He would never invent a story like that. He believed what he saw, and so do I." To skeptics, it was denial, a father's desperate attempt to find meaning in loss. To believers, it was conviction, proof that even those closest to the case knew something extraordinary had happened. In one televised interview, Guido looked directly into the camera and said, "He will return one day. I know it." Scene 6. The legacy of faith and sorrow. As years turned into decades, the Valentich family's determination kept the case alive in public memory. UFO groups cited Guido's words as proof that governments hide alien encounters. Pilots remembered Frederick as a cautionary tale about night, flying, and inexperience. And everyday Australians remembered the human story, a family caught between grief and the impossible. Every now and then, tourists still visit the Bass Strait cliffs, leaving flowers, toy airplanes, and handwritten notes marked for Frederick. Scene 7. Transition to Chapter 11. For the Valentich family, time did not heal. It only deepened the mystery. But as technology advanced and investigators looked again at the evidence, new theories began to emerge, theories that tried, once more, to explain the unexplainable. Fade out with ocean sounds and the whisper of wind through the headset static. Modern sonar scans, radar data, and aviation experts re-examine the disappearance decades later. But do they bring answers, or just more questions? New leads and modern theories. Decades may have passed since that night in 1978, but the mystery of Frederick Valentich refuses to rest. As technology improved, so did the questions. Could modern science finally solve one of Australia's most haunting disappearances? Scene 1. Rediscovering a forgotten case. By the early 2000s, the Valentich case had almost faded into folklore, a ghost story told by pilots and UFO enthusiasts. But with the internet came a new generation of researchers, skeptics, and digital archivists determined to look again. Online communities began sharing scanned copies of the original radio transcripts, flight maps, and witness statements. And for the first time, aviation data analysts could cross-reference Valentich's flight path with modern radar and meteorological archives. Some believed that hidden within the old data lay the clue everyone had missed. Scene 2. The 2013 discovery. In 2013, hope resurfaced when Marine search team detected a small aircraft wreck in the Bass Strait using sonar. At first, reports spread that the long-lost Cessna 182L might finally have been found. News outlets across Australia reignited the story. But after examination by the Victorian Police Diving Squad, the aircraft was confirmed to be a World War II-era training plane, not Valentich's. Still, the incident showed how powerfully this case continued to grip the public. Even a faint possibility sparked national attention, decades after the event. Scene 3. New investigative angles. Modern aviation experts revisited the data with fresh tools. Computer simulations were run to model the possible flight paths, fuel limits, and altitude readings based on the final radio transmission. Their findings? Valentich's Cessna could have easily become disoriented in the dark, entering what's known as a graveyard spiral. In such a descent, the pilot loses sense of direction and believes the plane is level while it's gradually banking downward, leading to a crash into the ocean within minutes. To skeptics, this was the answer. But even with these models, there was still no wreckage, no debris, and no conclusive proof. Scene 4. Revisiting the UFO angle. Meanwhile, UFO researchers weren't finished. They noticed that Valentich's final transmission coincided with multiple reported UFO sightings across southeastern Australia that same night. Witnesses described a fast-moving green light streaking across the sky, hovering, then vanishing. Some of these reports came from ground observers, fishermen, and even air traffic controllers who saw strange radar echoes that couldn't be explained. In 2014, a former Australian UFO researcher named Keith Basterfield re-examined the case. His conclusion: there is no direct evidence of alien contact, but there are enough anomalies to suggest something extraordinary did occur. Scene 5. Reassessing Frederick himself. With access to new data, psychologists analyzed Frederick's final words, tone, and timing. They noted he remained calm for most of the exchange, unusual for a pilot in genuine danger. This led to theories that he might have been confused, hallucinating, or oxygen-deprived due to a malfunction. Yet his final words, "It's not an aircraft," continue to defy that logic. Because even under stress, pilots typically describe what they see, and he seemed certain about what it was not. Scene 6. Technology meets mystery. Modern sonar mapping has scanned less than 30% of the Bass Strait's sea floor in high detail. Oceanographers say that even with advanced tech, the region's shifting currents and uneven terrain make finding small wrecks almost impossible. In other words, it's entirely possible Valentich's plane still lies somewhere beneath the waves, untouched and undiscovered, hidden by time and the sea. Scene 7. The modern legacy. Today, Frederick Valentich's name continues to appear in documentaries, aviation safety studies, and UFO research files. He has become a symbol of modern myth meeting modern science, a reminder that even in an age of satellites and radar, some stories remain unsolved. For every skeptic with a theory, there's a believer with a question, and both sides agree on one thing: something extraordinary happened that night. It's been over 4 decades since Frederick Valentich disappeared over the Bass Strait. But the mystery still whispers across the waves, asking the same question that haunted his family, investigators, and the world. What really happened that night? Fade out, distant sound of a radio crackle, then silence. Legacy, reflection, and mystery unending. 40 years. That's how long it's been since a young pilot named Frederick Valentich vanished into the night sky over Australia's Bass Strait. No wreckage, no trace, only questions and echoes of his final words. Scene 1. The man behind the mystery. Frederick wasn't just a name in an aviation file. He was a son, a dreamer, a young man chasing the skies. His father, Guido Valentich, believed until his final days that his son was taken, not lost. He once said, "If Fred is gone, then I believe he's gone somewhere we cannot reach." For the family, hope and grief became lifelong companions. They kept his room the same, his belongings untouched, a shrine to a son who went flying one evening and never came home. Scene 2. The investigator's legacy. The Department of Transport's final report concluded: the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined. No sign of mechanical failure. No flight error conclusively proven. Just uncertainty, the kind that both haunts and humbles investigators to this day. For aviation safety experts, the Valentich case became a case study in pilot disorientation and communication breakdowns. But for believers, it became something more, a riddle between heaven and earth. Scene 3. The public's enduring fascination. From documentaries to podcasts, from internet forums to museum exhibits, Frederick's story refuses to fade. The Valentich case is now woven into the fabric of UFO history, aviation mystery, and pop culture alike. Why? Because it touches on something deeper, our human obsession with the unknown. Every generation finds a new angle, a new theory, a new way to interpret that haunting final message. It's not an aircraft. Those 5 words have sparked decades of debate, and they still send chills down the spine of anyone who hears the actual recording. Disappearance. Frederick's case reshaped how small aircraft are tracked in Australia. New communication standards, radar protocols, and emergency procedures were strengthened after his disappearance. In that sense, his loss wasn't in vain. It taught aviation officials that mysteries can spark progress, even in tragedy. But more than policy, Valentich left behind a philosophical legacy, a reminder that humanity's reach for the sky always comes with risk, wonder, and questions we may never fully answer. Scene 7. Reflection and closure. Every mystery carries a heartbeat. Behind every unsolved case, there's a family, a dream, and a moment frozen in time. Frederick Valentich's disappearance is more than a UFO story. It's a human story about belief, courage, and the eternal pursuit of truth. Maybe he saw something no one else could. Maybe he simply vanished into the fog of fate. The skies still whisper the name, Frederick Valentich. Another mystery that time could not erase. If you believe in the unknown, if you crave the stories that challenge reality, then don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this journey. Let's keep exploring the mysteries that the world still cannot explain, together. But one thing's for sure, his story will never stop haunting the skies above Australia.